Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has claimed that the decisive phase of Russia's war against Ukraine has shifted from land and sea to the air. In an interview with Financial Times on Monday, Zelensky said he believes that the war belongs to whoever is smarter, arguing that the battle in the sky would determine the outcome of the war. His statement comes as Ukrainian drones struck deep inside Russian territory, targeting a major oil refinery in Omsk in West Siberia. Now, located nearly 2,500 kilometers away from the Ukraine border, that's deep inside Russian territory, the strike on the oil refinery is being considered a decisive victory for Ukraine. It accounts for 12% of Russia's oil refining output as of June, with a capacity of 460,000 barrels a day.
Today, our long-range sanctions reach the oil refinery in Omsk, nearly 1,150 miles from Ukraine. Upgraded Firepoint drones have put Siberia within reach of Ukrainian precision. This is a significant blow to Russia's oil economy and an important achievement for the armed forces of Ukraine.
Well, Zelensky also renewed urgent pleas for U.S. Patriot missiles. He said that if given licenses, Ukraine would be able to produce Patriots to defend the country. Making his case, he said Russia launched 68 missiles and over 350 drones, while highlighting the shortage of defense systems. Now, Ukraine's repeated strikes on oil refineries and other infrastructure inside the country has also severely crippled local markets. Gasoline shortages, fuel rationing have been reported in multiple regions, with drivers waiting for hours to fill their tanks. According to reports, the situation has also triggered widespread gasoline theft. Meanwhile, Ukraine's drone commander also released drone footage of attacks on Russian fuel tankers in the Sea of Azov, a fuel terminal in Crimea, and two S-400 Triumph long-range anti-aircraft missile systems on Monday. Now, Ukraine's latest attack on Russia comes after Putin launched a deadly wave of airstrikes on Ukrainian capital Kyiv. According to local authorities, more than 28 people have been killed as Russia fired missiles and drones into apartment buildings for the second time in a week. In the Kyiv suburb, a massive overnight Russian barrage tore through the residential area, punching a crater into a multi-story apartment complex. Officials even say that 8 people have been killed and over 600 were being evacuated.
We were in the apartment. There were explosions, more and more of them. It was very terrifying, very. The 4 of us, plus the dog, sat on the floor in a tiny corridor. We could hear windows being ripped out, glass shattering.
Now, the latest escalation comes as the NATO summit gets underway in Ankara, where Zelensky is slated to meet with the US president to discuss peace proposals. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has also admitted that the NATO alliance is hitting a wall with military stockpiles, confirming a physical limit to the number of interceptor missiles left in NATO territory. He said US emergency munitions deliveries are actively en route to Ukraine under a prioritized procurement framework. All right, to discuss this further, I'm now being joined by Dr. Glenn Deason, Professor of International Relations at the University of Southeastern Norway, joining me from Oslo. Glenn, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much for making time. Let's start right off. Putin, do you feel the Russian president would be rethinking Russia's war strategy? The war is into its 5th year and Ukraine is fighting far inside Russia as of now.
Yes, and I think that the strategy is changing. That is, it's continuously escalating. That is, the Ukrainian missiles are becoming longer range, more effective, but also the involvement of the NATO countries is deepening as well. Again, the European countries are very open about their objectives to mass produce missiles, to strike deeper and deeper inside Russia, and also setting dates essentially for preparing for possible more direct involvement in a war with Russia. So I think the Russian strategy now will change dramatically. Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson of the Kremlin, has already said that the whole conflict has shifted from a special military operation to war. So I would assume that the Russians will be more heavy-handed against Ukraine, and you might also possibly see an attack on European NATO countries as well. That is a retaliatory attack possibly against a country like Estonia, which was essentially caught in participating in the attacks on St. Petersburg.
Glenn, drones reaching as far as 2,500 kilometers from that shared border and Omsk. This is West Siberia. This is unprecedented. I mean, at least not till a few months ago it was unprecedented, not now. How is Ukraine managing to hit that deep inside Russia?
Well, one or two things have happened. That is, either there's this, they have now just longer range drones, or these are drones that are smuggled inside Russia and then used to strike targets in Russia. That is, you saw something similar a year ago when the attacks occurred on Russia's nuclear deterrent. And at this point, we also learned that from the Russian intelligence services, at least they claimed that the British were also involved in this. But either way, if it is actually long-range missiles originating from Ukrainian territory, then obviously the technology and the weapons are developed now together with NATO, which have again set the objective for striking deeper and deeper inside Russia. But also the United States, it's no secret that it assists in how the Ukrainian drones and missiles should navigate through the Russian air defenses in the most optimal way. So again, this is my point. When you see these deeper and deeper strikes in Russia, they also represent a clear escalation. That is, people can say, yes, of course, Ukraine should have the right to defend itself. But what we're seeing is increasingly this is NATO attacks on Russia. And for this reason, you also hear now growing voices within Russia that if NATO can attack Russia, then why allow Europe at least to be a safe zone? So I would expect some huge escalations in the weeks to come.
Glenn, on that note, the huge escalation, does that include a nuclear option? How far long before Russia starts relying on that stockpile of nuclear missiles that it has?
Well, the problem is even if it's a tactical nuclear weapon, that is a smaller one, once nuclear weapons are used, cat is out of the bag, and it's going to be very hard to reverse what has been done. So I think this will be the last possible option. What I do think, though, is one of the reasons why the Russians altered their nuclear doctrine, that is lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons, is because they realized the direction of this war over the past 4.5 years. The NATO countries have gradually escalated in terms of their own involvement in this war, and you now have the situation where NATO leaders leaders from NATO countries at least are speaking very openly about both their intention and capabilities of striking inside Russia. And for this reason, the Russians are now coming more or less to the conclusion that they let their own deterrent fall apart, because the NATO countries do not fear a Russian retaliation. They don't think the Russians dare. So this is a disaster. So it's becoming more dangerous to do nothing than to do something. So I think at some point the Russians will retaliate now against a European country in NATO, but with conventional weapons. That being said, once the Russian attack on NATO occurs, it's very difficult to predict exactly where this is going to go. We will go up the escalation ladder, but the assumption that there will be any escalation control, that is, that we can control what level the conflict should be at, I think that's a dangerous delusion. So for this reason, I think that once a direct war now will break out between Russia and NATO, they can rapidly go up the escalation ladder. And if, for example, NATO starts bombing or trying to invade Kaliningrad, that's an existential threat to Russia. And at such a point, I think that the Russians would use some tactical nuclear weapons, either on the Baltic states or Germany, most likely. But we're not quite there yet. But you don't go into a direct war unless you have preparations. But I think from the conventional weapons, the Russians can escalate to using the Oreshniks, and then you go to nuclear weapons.
Understood. And the Oreshnik, it was tested 2024, and then we've also seen more references to it over the last few months as well. The escalation trap, we've seen more and more instances of it. We saw it in West Asia, where even now you're hearing of sporadic firings across the Strait of Hormuz as they still continue and the threats still continue. And now we're also seeing it in this war, which is now in its fifth year. Where do you stop? But on that point, I wanted to come to the fortress belt of Ukraine towards its eastern flank. Konstantinivka, Russia claims that they've already taken this town. They've already taken this region. It leaves two other important regions in the fortress belt. Do you feel the fall of Konstantinivka, as Russia claims, is a gateway right towards Kyiv?
Well, not directly to Kyiv, but once you see now Konstantinivka hasn't fallen in the south of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, and up north you have Krasny Liman, which is falling, and that this allows the Russians to put what remains of Donbas in a pincer. And so they're getting very close to finishing off then Donetsk. When I say close, I mean they can go on for the rest of the year. It's not a matter of weeks. But once Donbas is firmly under Russian control, this is where the strongest defensive lines of the Ukrainians are. After this, there's not much anymore. They can march towards the Dnieper River, and they can indeed also move closer then to Kiev. So it does represent a massive shift in the war, the fact that the Russians are now breaking through this final and last belt. But it also has some possibilities for opening up some diplomatic opportunities, because the Russians have set it in stone that Donbas must be under Russian control. And that being said, it's near impossible for the Ukrainian government to accept this, because they would have to walk away from some of the most heavily fortified positions, which they already control. So this isn't really politically feasible. But once the Russians have taken it, then perhaps it's easier to reach a peace agreement. But at the time being, it's complicated by many other things, of course. But yes, once Slavyansk and Kramatorsk falls, then it opens up huge possibilities for the Russians for warfare, but it can also open up huge possibilities for diplomacy. So in other words, the war will change as a result of this.
Understood. But it's not been easy for the Russians, whether it was Bakhmut or whether it was Avdiivka and coming to Konstantinivka. Here it's not been easy. It's been a very slow process, but inching forward regardless of the amount of power that they've put on the front lines. But there is a shift. Constantly you're hearing of more and more towns which are gradually falling towards Russian control. Even though Ukraine continues to strike deep inside Russia. We'll need to wait and watch how this one pans out. Glenn, thanks so much for making time.
Thank you.